Welcome to Saving America. This is your host, Dr. David D. Schein. And it's been a week packed with action from start to finish. And hey, we'll start with a special note here because this is number 52 of Week in Review. So we've completed a year of this special format that we started, and it's been quite a year, lots of stuff going on, and we appreciate every single one of you who listen to all or a part of each episode. The so-called Big Beautiful Bill is passed by the House. The Senate needed the help of VP Vance to make it 5150. In the House, it was 218-214, with only 2 GOP voting against it. I am more in the camp with Elon Musk that this is a disgusting abomination. The problem is that this 940-page mess had to pass to keep in effect tax cuts from the Trump's first administration. I support keeping the tax cuts. Much in the bill is still pork. While the Dems shout that Medicaid is being cut and that will hurt millions, that is far from the truth. There are too few cuts in spending while giving out bribes for future voters like candy. This no tax on tips, overtime, and Social Security payments. Why would we do this at a time of daunting federal deficit is beyond me. So the idiots known as the Dems cast not a single vote for the bill. That includes Fetterman from Pennsylvania. This gives the GOP tremendous talking points for them over the Dems in the 2026 election. The ultimate outcome, of course, remains to be seen. New Yorkers vote for dirty commie in the Dem primary. For some reason, New York City, home to the New York Stock Exchange and great wealth, along with Broadway, has become home to a collection of wackos and commies. Not sure how these factions came together. The latest in the saga of the decline of New York was a win in the New York City Democrat primary by Zohran Mamdani, about 100,000 votes over former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. This could be the end of the road for Cuomo, who in my opinion has so much baggage that I'm not sure why he bothered. The current mayor, Eric Adams, decided to become an independent, so he was not in this primary. The GOP candidate is unlikely to have a chance. So the focus has been on Mamdani, who appears to be dumber than AOC, who is one of the few in politics who have endorsed this guy, other than, of course, Senator Bernie the Fraud from Vermont. The commie diarrhea flowing out of his mouth makes no sense. There is no mayor in any city with the authority to implement the crazed changes that he claims to want. Free supermarkets, no police, free buses, protect illegals from deportation, no death penalty, and taxing white areas more than other areas of the city. Hey, I grew up during the Cold War. We never said commie without the word dirty in front of it. This dirty commie is off by about 100 years. He might have been able to sell this nonsense back then during the Great Depression, but not now. While the media is having a field day with this, I do not expect it to last through the election. I believe that the slopstream media seems to be making him a winner of the mayor's seat months from the election simply to get headlines. Adams, if he plays his cards right, should continue to be the mayor. After all, the USSR, Venezuela, North Korea, and even the recent problems in China underscore the historic failures of communism. This label of democratic socialist that Mamdani uses is a simple hoax with the willing help of the slopstream media. I'm not fooled, and I do not believe if you're listening to this webcast, you are not fooled either. NATO 5% plan, helping out Ukraine. Trump returned from the NATO summit reportedly with the deal that every member country will put 5% of their GNP into defense, although I hear Spain has not agreed to that number yet. Further, it is unclear what will be considered military spending and the length of time allowed to get to that 5% level. In any event, Trump claims a big victory here, and it's an apparent victory at some level. Flipping it a bit, the Europeans were more easily persuaded due to the anti-civilization attacks on the people of Ukraine by that failed murdering terrorist Putin. However, now is the time for them to step up their efforts to fully support Ukraine in surviving this unconscionable devastation by Putin. At the same time, I'm concerned to hear that America will pull back its support of Ukraine. I'm a hardcore anti-communist and Putin must be dealt with harshly. That is not happening yet. Worse, the reason for the pullback by the United States at a critical time is because our own military stockpiles are running low. As we are well into the second Cold War, we need to be at our peak, not our low. This is factually what led to both World War I and World War II. America cannot let its guard down. We must make the best armaments in the world and in sufficient quantities to cover the USA and sell our extra to our allies. As I have recommended before, we need to focus on what works today, not what worked yesterday. We must control space, the underseas world, and provide missile defense. Russia and Ukraine are combining the old and the new. The new approach is winning out as the ground forces sit stalled. I believe we can win the new Cold War for far less than we now spend on the military if we spend it intelligently. The failure of DOGE so far was the lack of understanding of what to cut and where the future investments need to go. And this is the failure of both political parties, not one party or the other. Iran backs out of peace talks. The word is that the terrorist in charge, Khomeini, actually had the chutzpah to claim that Iran won the recent 12-day war. We all know that ain't true. Now that Israeli and U.S. planes have stopped dropping targeted bombs on Iran, this coward has crawled out of a hole somewhere. While the ceasefire is holding, they now claim they don't need to negotiate a longer-term peace deal. Good news on that is that Trump said he would stop considering reducing sanctions on Iran. While there's some disagreement about the level of destruction, Iran did hold funerals for 60 nuclear scientists and military commanders who were killed in the 12-day war. I have to believe that this alone sets back both nuclear bomb development and the ability of the terrorist rulers to maintain control of the country. I would suggest extensive support be given to the network within Iran to replace the terrorists with a provisional government. And let's try not to replicate Afghanistan or Iraq. Trial set for March, an assassination plot against Trump. March 9, 2026 is the date for the trial of 3 terrorists who are accused of planning to kill President Trump and an Iranian dissident named Marish Al-Junizad. However, the key guy, Farhad Sakiri, an Afghan-born piece of garbage, is hiding in Tehran, and I doubt they will have him in custody for his trial. He spent time in prison in the U.S., reportedly assembled a team of other losers. 2 of his recruits are in custody. Carlisle Rivera, also known as Pop, and Jonathan Lodeholt. Both of them have New York addresses, and that's about all I could find out about them. This is a situation all Americans should be very concerned about. I lived through the Kennedy assassination, the very serious injuries Ronald Reagan and Brady experienced due to the attempted assassination. We all lived through the near miss on President Trump when he was campaigning in Pennsylvania last year. We do not need more death and destruction. FBI Director Kash Patel and Deputy Director Dan Bongino recently disclosed that the FBI, under Chris Wray, hid evidence of a Chinese plot to interfere in the 2020 presidential election. Reportedly, the CCP created mass-produced fake U.S. driver's license, which would allow bad actors to submit fake mail-in ballots for Joe Biden to push the 2020 election to Biden. The original source was based on information that Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley got from whistleblowers and forwarded to the FBI. It was not properly investigated. Given the massive damage that Biden's administration did on the world stage, the reason for the support for him by the CCP, and for that matter, Putin, is obvious. The mechanism was that the CCP supposedly used data from hacking TikTok accounts to steal real persons' data to create the fake driver's licenses and then send them to CCP sympathizers and operatives in the United States. Sadly, over the last few years, the number of well-known brand names that have filed for bankruptcy, including the many that have gone completely out of business, is indeed concerning. This is in the face of a surging stock market and generally good employment news. The latest bankruptcies are retailer At Home USA, which filed for Chapter 11 in Texas, and one of the largest retail pharmacy chains, Rite Aid. It filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in New Jersey. This has become so common that I came across an article titled 10 Biggest U.S. Bankruptcies of 2025. But folks, we're only halfway through the year. Trump has called on Fed Chair Powell to lower the official lending rate, not looking likely so far. Housing has shifted from a seller's to a buyer's market. This is a reflection of economic uncertainty, but also those high mortgage rates. In the whiplash department, Trump announced he would cut off tariff and trade discussions with Canada. That only lasted 2 days, as Canada then announced it would remove the digital services tax it was charging U.S. companies. So those trade talks are back on. Trump then announced a tariff deal with Vietnam that will include a 20% tariff on their goods coming to the U.S. and reportedly no interference or tariffs on selling U.S. goods in Vietnam. Hey, we'll see how that goes. As a person who earned his undergraduate degree at the University of Pennsylvania, I was pleased to see that Penn came to its senses. It just announced that it will correct the awards grabbed by fake female swimmer Leah Thomas and restore them to the women who actually earned them. I quickly add that I am not opposed to persons who are transitioning or have transitioned. As a consultant to industry, I've helped protect employees going through transition. However, if a male has gone through puberty, there will never be a fair athletic competition with a biological female due to the natural differences between men and women. On the higher education front, we have whiplash there as well. The U.S. has resumed after cutting off student visas from overseas. The caveat is that the administration ordered social media screening of all potential visiting students. Reportedly, the review will be looking for any indications of hostility towards the citizens, culture, government institutions, or founding principles of the United States. This has a massive impact on colleges and universities in the U.S., as 1.1 million students attend school here from other countries. Speaking as a university professor, my school needs those students since they are generally full tuition students. With so much in the slopstream media showing ICE in bad light, it's important to feature the positive work of this agency. ICE rescued trafficked children. Even before demented Joe Biden wandered out of the White House, the media was beginning to leak reports of massive abuse of the open border, which led to as many as 300,000 children being trafficked. The feds and the locals have no clue where they are. This is inhumanity at its worst level. ICE, under the Trump administration, led by Kristi Noem, has embarked on finding these children and making sure they are not being abused. Recall that children in the care of the Biden HHS were released to anyone who showed up. In some cases, the same address was used for the destination of over 100 children. The obvious end results were sex trafficking and child labor allegations. This should never have happened in America. Reports are that Tom Homan has now been running DNA tests and found 1/3 of the families with these minor children are not actually their relatives. I'm glad that the current administration is dealing with this serious problem. I hope they'll speed up the investigations. Speaking as an American, I'm just sorry that this was even allowed to get to this level.
All rise.
Saving America welcomes John R. Miles. He's an entrepreneur, award-winning podcast host, former U.S. Navy officer, and a Fortune 50 senior executive. He is a leading authority on intentional behavior change. He is the author of Passion Struck, 12 Powerful Principles to Unlock Your Purpose and Ignite Your Most Intentional Life. These principles are applied to a person's mindset and behavior. Miles discovered these by examining and interviewing successful professionals such as Mark Bainoff, David Rubenstein, Katie Milkman, Bernie Marcus, Yuri Levine, Marshall Goldsmith, Robin Sharma, Susan Cain, Sean Springs, Thaddeus Bullard, Elon Musk, Susan Wojcicki, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Navy SEALs astronaut Chris Cassidy, and General Stanley McChrystal, who we see on the news occasionally. His book, Passion Struck, is a gold winner as recognized by the Nonfiction Authors Association. Our series of interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. We welcome John Miles for his first appearance on Saving America.
Oh, David, such an honor to be here, and love the name of your podcast and also your book that you wrote about on the same topic.
Thank you so much, John. So let's get our audience up to speed on what you're up to. So you were describing a very specific area of expertise. Please share with the audience how you came to pursue this specific type of research.
I think we are best positioned to serve the person who we once were. And in my case, I was living what many people would call the dream life. I found myself in the C-level of a Fortune 50 organization. We were making $60 billion in revenue. And I should have been the happiest, most fulfilled in my entire career. And I felt just the opposite, completely lost, uh, out of control in many ways with the way my life was going from a personal perspective, because I was living it in a very unbalanced way. And I was so much consumed with my career that I was letting, in retrospect, the most important elements of my life, my health, my mental health, my relationships, etc., take second fiddle to this all-encompassing growth track that I found myself on. And I don't think I'm immune to the fact of this happening. I think so many people live life today as I was, which Henry David Thoreau coined as quiet desperation, where we find ourselves stuck in this spot where we're living the life we feel we should be living and not the ideal life that we've been put on earth to do. And so, what I've really documented is my own personal, what I call me search and path to going from where I was to doing the career and life that I have now. And so, what I found was at the core of all of that was living life intentionally, meaning I really discovered that it's the intentional choices that we make, the micro choices that make up the moments, the seconds, the minutes, the hours of our every single day of life that we live, that ultimately culminate into what I like to call the tsunami of greatness or the waterfall of despise. And you can choose to live your life wisely and end up in one scenario, or choose to live it the other way and end up in that valley of despair. And so that's what this whole movement is really about, is how do you create intentional choices every single day that get you closer to living your self-realized self.
Wow, what a powerful statement. So explain to our audience how your book, Passion Struck, can help people in various fields of work, because we're not all office workers and things like that. So how does that work?
So people often have asked me, looking back on your life, what would you tell your 20-something-year-old self? And my response is I would give him a copy of this book, because I wrote Passion Struck not just for the office workers, as you said, but anyone who fits one of these different profiles. Perhaps you're a high achiever no matter where you're at, but you're stagnant or you're stuck where you're at. How do you break through and, as Marshall Goldsmith said, get from where you're at to where you want to be? The other group of people are those who feel really stuck in their life, and they find themselves in that quiet desperation that I found myself in, and they don't know how to break through the chasm of the life they've created to the one that they could, if they're intentional about it, create for themselves. And then the last group of people would be new college graduates or young adults who are looking to chart their course in life. So I kind of oriented it so it would fit any one of those. And I think, similar to your books, what I am realizing is that not only the United States, but most Western countries are in a period of decades of decline. I mean, if you look at the charts on entrepreneurship, which made the United States the envy of everyone else worldwide, we're in 4 to 5 decades of decline, and it's not ending. And I believe a big reason for this is we have decided in so many cases to take the path like I took, which was the safe path. I came out of my time as a military officer, and when my opportunity to go in the FBI didn't happen, I ended up in the business world. And there was a point during that trajectory when I was at Arthur Anderson, actually in Houston, where you're based, where the whole company, because of the Enron fiasco, disintegrated before my eyes right as I was putting on partner. So the timing couldn't have been any worse. And I had a chance at that point to go down the entrepreneurial route myself. But I think I was conditioned to kind of see that the way that my life was going was to work for a company, work my way up, do the classical type of job structure that my father did. And I think a lot of people are entrapped in that thinking and not thinking of how your life could be different. And I really believe that with the onset of all the digital disruption that's around us, AI, robotics, etc., that life as we know it in work, regardless of what industry you're in, is completely evolving. And the one thing that you can do to take charge is to live your life as if you are a constant learning machine. Because the one thing that you're going to need to do if you want to be able to take charge of your career and your life with all the change around us is to stay ahead of it. So that's what the book really teaches you, is how to use passion, perseverance, and intentionality, all coupled with a constant learning mindset, to really create the path to a life that feels fulfilling and allows you to really outplay the forces that are going to completely disrupt millions and millions of lives over the next 2 decades.
It's such an impressive situation, and I can certainly relate to that. As you know, we ask 3 questions and we try and keep it short. So you've got 12 principles in your book. We don't have time to cover all of that, but would you like to share with our audience a couple examples, 2 or 3 examples, so they'll know what to see or expect in your book?
Sure. The book is created out of 3 different sections. The first one and the second one all go into these shifts or principles that I talk about. 6 of them are mindset shifts and 6 of them are behavior shifts. And then the last section of the book I call the psychology of progress, is really using behavior science, psychology, and neuroscience to implement them into your life. So out of the 12 principles, a few that might resonate with people. One would be the mosquito auditor. I'd like to use metaphors so that people would remember these concepts. And this has been a fan favorite. I happen to be listening to a radio program where the announcer asked, "What is the most dangerous animal on the planet?" And like all the listeners who were calling in, we all got it wrong. We were all thinking sharks or lions, spiders, this, that. It turns out that it's the mosquito. And even today, as we're recording this, on the front page of the Wall Street Journal was another mosquito-borne illness that is starting to go global.
Yes.
So the reason why I ended up doubling down on this is mosquitoes by themselves feel so benign. I mean, oftentimes we'll hear their buzzing, but we don't really take them seriously in much of the Western world because we get bitten, we have some itching, we don't think that they do much harm, but that's really not the case in much of the world where it's killing millions of people each year. The same thing go for the invisible influences in our lives. And I lay out in the book 3 different types of mosquitoes. They're more than this, but I thought this was 3 clear examples: the bloodsucker, the invisible suffocator, and the pain in the ass. So that is one chapter, and I write it in a way for your personal life, and I also go through examples for your career as well. I think in the second section, where I go into the behavioral shifts, there are a number here that are really important, but I'll go to the last one. I wrote this chapter on the concept of being a conscious engager. And I was really exploring here all the distractions in life that are keeping us from becoming the best person that we can become. And people often say, you know, John, you're living your life on autopilot. And I think it's the wrong analogy, because on autopilot, at least the plane is going in typically a positive direction. I think the better analogy that I explore is that we're living our lives more like we're pinballs aimlessly drifting through the game of pinball, not controlling the pinball, but letting it letting the game play us. And I think it's a great analogy for how so many of us live our lives. And in this chapter, I really explore the wisdom of Stephen Covey, specifically his adage that the main thing about the main thing is keeping the main thing the main thing. And so oftentimes, as we chart our course, we have a main thing, which is typically the values that we live our lives against. Yet, with all the distraction around us, they often get pushed to the wayside. And I think it's when that happens, we find ourselves living unintentionally, just going through the motions like the aimless pinball. And I go through much more exploration than that. But those are just two quick examples of the 12 principles.
Really amazing, John. Sounds like a tremendous book. How can our audience get more information about you and your book?
Well, thank you for asking me that. The best two ways would either be to go to the company website that I'm a part of, Passionstruck, PASSIONSTRUCK, just like the book behind me, or my personal website, John, middle initial R, Miles.com. You can find the book wherever books are, and you can find my podcast, Passionstruck, wherever podcasts are.
Please proceed.
As we grow up, a common reference for success or failure is the letter grade. Whether we are in grammar school or college, we all want an A grade and certainly regard an F as a big failure. Here at Saving America, we scan the news for reports of celebrities, politicians, or others who just end up in the public eye. So the A grades are awarded to people and organizations for great service to their communities, and the F grades, of course, are unfortunately more common, are awarded to those who need to do a lot better. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey obviously has been out in the cold too long without a hat. The badge of dishonor today belongs to Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. Despite the damage done to the good people of this country by the Biden-Harris invasion of illegals, this mental case has publicly announced an intention to continue to have Minneapolis be a safe haven for illegals. What part of the poll that shows over 85% of Americans want the illegals out of here did Frey miss? What part of overwhelming public support for Trump's immigration policies did Frey miss? I support Tom Homan's efforts to arrest illegals wherever they are found in this great country which is under siege. If Frey gets in the way, I call on the feds to charge him and hopefully convict him of harboring federal fugitives. As my audience knows, when I doubt it would be happening here, I'm a strong proponent of the death penalty. Just a hint. I encourage my audience to boycott Minneapolis after the George Floyd riots. The city should be doing everything it can to get back on track, not the opposite. My annual academic conference is currently scheduled for this failed city in the summer of 2026. I have told the organizers that I will never attend anything in that mess due to personal safety concerns. So Saving America awards today's F grade to Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey for being out of touch with the welfare of the American people and his citizens in Minneapolis and Minnesota.
Motion denied.
No, it's not your imagination. When I talk about danger from all sides in this case, it is not Israel, it is the United States. A recent report by the U.S. Immigration and Law Enforcement, ICE, revealed significant numbers of illegal immigrants with criminal histories on ICE's national docket. The criminal histories on ICE's docket include high volumes of illegals convicted of homicide and sexual assault. The numbers along the southern border are stunning, but what has gone largely unnoticed is the record-breaking number of crossings over the northern border from Canada by individuals on the terror watch list. The border with Canada is huge, and much of it is untended due to the relatively light population in Canada and the fact that in the past, most of the bad news came from the Mexican border. A key finding in the ICE report is that under current processes, CBP and ICE cannot assure that they are keeping high-risk non-citizens without identification from entering the country. Additionally, TSA cannot ensure that its vetting and screening procedures prevent high-risk non-citizens who may pose a threat to the flying public from boarding domestic flights. Of course, separately, Americans know that fentanyl deaths in this country are totally out of control. The latest full year is 2023, and for the first time in U.S. history, fatal overdoses peaked above 112,000 deaths in just 1 year. This is young people and people of color are among the hardest hit. With such a lack of control, how serious is the risk posed to U.S. national security?
How does the defendant plead?
Business students, business persons, or consumers, business law impacts much of what you do. This segment is designed to help you get past the headlines on key stories. A routine Chapter 11 bankruptcy case results in a key ruling on recusing a judge. James Dondero and Highland Capital Management Fund advisors lost a $180 million arbitration case. They then filed a voluntary Chapter 11 petition in bankruptcy court in Delaware. Shortly after, the creditors committee of Highland moved to transfer the case to the bankruptcy court for the Northern District of Texas on the basis that Chief Judge Jernigan was already intimately familiar with the debtor's principles and complex organizational structure, having presided over 2 other involuntary bankruptcy cases commenced against other companies where Dondero had also served as an executive. The motion was granted and the case was assigned to Chief Judge Jernigan. The judge then held the first hearing in the Highland case regarding approval of a settlement between Highland and the creditors committee, under which Dondero would surrender his control positions at Highland and be replaced by an independent board. The judge approved the agreed order. Dondero stepped down as officer and director of Highland. He remained an employee of Highland as a portfolio manager until the independent board demanded that he step down. Then Dondero continued to argue for multiple reorganization plans, which were opposed by the creditor committee and the independent board. The judge confirmed the creditor plan. However, the judge indicated that Dondero was a serial litigator and that he did not have a good faith basis to lob objections to the plan. Dondero appealed the confirmation order directly to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which affirmed the reorganization plan and confirmation order of the bankruptcy court. He then continued for another 1.5 years to file multiple appeals arguing against various parts of the plan to reorganize the financial companies. 15 months after the case was moved to Texas, Dondero then moved to recuse Judge Jernigan because he claimed that she had developed an animus against Dondero and his associates. She denied the recusal request. Dondero appealed to the Fifth Circuit again. Among his many complaints, get this, was a unique argument that she had published 2 novels in which he claimed that the financial industry and hedge funds in particular were presented in a negative way. The Fifth Circuit denied the appeal and said of the recusal motion because the Dondero parties had failed to show a clear and indisputable right to relief. So just because a judge writes a book that might show your company's business in a negative light doesn't get you to get rid of the judge.
Please raise your right hand.
A bizarre interstate case involving punitive damages and eBay employees. From the I can't make this up department comes the case of Steiner versus eBay Incorporated in the District Court of Massachusetts. The case is so complex a law school course could be built around it. In any event, Massachusetts couple Ina and David Steiner operate E-Commerce Bites, a trade publication which was critical of eBay, which of course is based in California. In a crazy fact situation, it was alleged that the executives and employees of eBay were so incensed by the criticism of the Steiners that they engaged in harassment and stalking of them. This included signing the Steiners up for over 50 unwanted email subscriptions and sending weird packages to their home, including fly larvae, spiders, a bloody pig mask, and a funeral wreath. The planning and email scams were done from California. Amazingly, some of the bad actors went to Massachusetts to surveil and vandalize the Steiners' home. So for legal analysis, this is a 2-state case. This case has both criminal and civil aspects. The criminal charges were brought against 7 individuals involved in the conspiracy, all of whom have pled guilty. eBay itself was fined $3 million for the criminal charges by the feds. Of the civil aspects awarding possible damages to the Steiners, some will fall under Massachusetts law, but under others, California law. An interesting aspect of the case is that Massachusetts does not have punitive damages for parts of the civil case. However, California does. So judicial review included whether certain claims would fall under one state or the other. This is called a conflict of laws analysis. The judge just ruled on the application of punitive damages. However, a final decision has not yet been made in the civil case. I predict with the defendants pleading guilty to criminal charges, there likely will be a significant civil award if it gets that far. I want to credit Professor Emeritus Eugene Volk, who is the fellow of the Hoover Institute, for his newsletter coverage of this interesting case.
Objection, Your Honor.
Trump's executive orders facing court battles with filings with liberal judges in blue states. A federal district judge in New York, of course, has issued an ex parte restraining order to block all political appointees from accessing Treasury Administration records. Note that ex parte means nobody from the Trump administration was given a chance to appear and respond. This, of course, is based on the Dems' hysteria about Musk and his buddies looking for wasteful spending. The Trump administration has filed an emergency motion to vacate the injunction. The judge's order was that only civil servants could access these records. Note that the Treasury Secretary himself is a political appointee. Trump's legal argument is that Article 2 of the United States Constitution establishes the executive branch of the government and the role of the president. The judge may be interfering with the president's right to supervise the executive branch, including all political appointed leaders within the Treasury Department. Now, a highly publicized fight is about USAID. The agency was set up with the intention of making America look good on the international stage by showing our capitalist kindness relative to our dirty commies on the other side, feeding people and helping them get clean water and health care. What a fine objective. Naturally, that is not what is happening today. Much of the aid is intended for the poor that is going to tribal leaders and gangsters, not that needy population. This is just a fact. Further, there's been some extensive publicity recently of some of the most pathetic uses of our tax dollars around the world that's not being used for food and healthcare and things like that for the truly needy. And that's a false narrative for sure. At least the bulk of the aid is not being used for the way it's being sold to the public. So Trump has been sued for putting a total hold on U.S. aid until things are straightened out. Various employee unions and some non-governmental organizations have sued to keep flushing your tax dollars down the nearest toilet. Most of the judges who have ruled against Trump are in blue states and were appointed by Dem presidents. No surprise there. I'm sensitive to one issue. If you work for USAID and your job stops while you're overseas, you do need to be shipped back to the United States. That is only fair. Now, some are complaining because their kids are in school and that'll interrupt their schooling. Hey, you know what? Tough. You chose to accept an overseas assignment while having young children at home. I was a product of a military family. We moved when the Department of Defense told us to move. Just the nature of that type of government employment. So grow up or get out. Paired with this information, a judge has blocked Trump's deportation plan with regard to shipping to Gitmo criminal illegals who cannot be returned to their home countries. I actually proposed this plan some time ago. Glad to see others are on my wavelength. There is, unfortunately, a court precedent that supports the judge's opinion. I believe the precedent is plain wrong and that hopefully the Trump administration will get a quick appellate court review and get this reversed. It seems to me that anyone here illegally has no right to access the already overburdened U.S. legal system. Gitmo is a perfect place as far as I'm concerned. And hey, it's in the Caribbean. It's sunny. What more do they need to complain about, huh, folks?
May I remind you, you're still under oath.
Our series Interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. We welcome Ken Good for his first appearance on Saving America. He graduated from Hardin-Simmons University in 1982 with a Bachelor of Arts degree. He received a Master of Education degree in 1986 from Tarleton State University. In 1989, he earned his law degree from Texas Tech School of Law, where he was a member of the Texas Tech Law Review. Mr. Good has argued cases before the Supreme Court of Texas, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, along with numerous courts of appeals, including the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. He is the author of Good on Bail, a practice guide created for the bail industry professionals. In addition, he has written numerous articles on the subject of bail reform, including what successful bail reform looks like. Mr. Good is married and has 2 daughters.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I feel like I'm racing to try to catch up with you after listening to that.
Well, sometimes we have to shorten the bios so that we can have enough time for the interview part of the meeting that we have here
Hey,
on
the
Zoom.
most important thing you said is I'm married and have 2 kids.
Yes, well, I'm one notch up. I've got a bunch of kids and I've got 7 grandchildren. You need to get to the next gen, you start counting the grandchildren.
I'm telling you, you're bragging now. You're making me very, very jealous.
You'll get there, I promise you. It's a trip. Well, as you know, our format is we ask our guests 3 questions. So first, tell us about the organization Professional Bondsmen of Texas.
Well, let's see. I would describe that as the voice of the bail industry in Texas. It's an organization that's made up of bail bondsmen across the state of Texas, but they also are very active. They have a legislative committee, so they're active at the legislature. I'm on the board of directors, and I'm on the legislative committee. We propose bills to the legislature, and we are a resource to the legislature on bail issues. And we should have an active session coming up. We have other committees that are very active. We have an annual meeting in the next few months, and so we're actively getting ready for that. And so I would describe our organization mostly as a resource to legislatures across the country and the public to educate them about bail-related issues. And I think we have a blog that highlights important stories in the criminal justice area, and we also have our own podcast, which we call the Bail Post. You can find a link to it on our website, pbtx.com, but you can also just go to thebailpost.com and you can find our shows that we've done about all kinds of different criminal justice issues.
Well, that sounds like a pretty important organization. Now, Ken, many Americans are concerned about persons accused of serious crimes being released without cash bond. Does that really make the community less safe?
I think that we are finding, well, we've always said yes. The answer to that question is yes. But I think during COVID, we found that there was a lot of data that supported that. There was Yolo County in California released a study after COVID where they found that people released on cash bonds by the private industry versus people released on simple release, which would be no cash bail. It's just called different things across the country. That people released on just simple release with their promise to come back had a 200% greater chance of committing a violent offense in the next 18 months. And that's, I think, a devastating number. I mean, think about it. Just the type of release that you're using puts the defendant or has a 200% greater chance of putting them in a worse position. How is that even possible? Well, the way it works is once you're released, the release mechanism determines your rate of return. So, the private industry has the lowest failure to appear rate. These no cash bail systems have a very high failure to appear rate. So if there's an 80% chance, like in all misdemeanor courts in California, because they use simple release, if there's an 80% chance you're not going to come back to court, or that your case is going to be put on hold until you come back because you missed court, well, there's a great risk that is going to create chaos because the same number of cases are being filed on average. And that puts an incredible pressure on courts to just dismiss cases. Chaos creates de facto decriminalization. De facto decriminalization is a green light for criminals to commit more crime. And that's what we've seen.
Well, it does seem that this situation is really, we're running kind of a test situation here in parts of the country with this no cash bail. And it sounds like the report so far is it's not working.
I think that's absolutely correct. And the problem is, it's not that we are trying something that we have studies that say we should try this. We're trying something that's never been done, and we're trying something that the experts would say there's nothing compatible with the private industry. That's the reason why it's been around for 200 years. All of these other things we're trying have not been tested. They've never been shown to work, and they have a huge failure to appear rate. But we're doing them anyway, so we're having the same results that we've had in the past.
Amazing. And I have to ask kind of an entertainment question as our third question today is, there's been a reality TV show about bail bondsmen. There was a fictional show, Lee Majors, The Fall Guy, where he was a professional stuntman, but when he wasn't doing that, he was out finding people that had skipped out on their bail. And of course, if the accused skips out on their bail, your bonding company still has to pay that cash to the court if they can't deliver the person. So how does what we've seen on television compare with what happens in your day-to-day life?
Well, I think the day-to-day life is a lot more boring. There's always a few exceptions to the rule, but let's start with the general stuff. So when you fail to miss court, you get scared. You don't know what's going to happen. So the bondsman calls you, talks to your family, and assures you, hey, this is what you can expect. Come on, we'll walk you back to court. And so I would say a large number of time people just get a call, they trust their bondsman, they go back to court, they get their case back on track pretty quickly. But the problem is, like in Texas, bondsmen don't have the ability to arrest. So we can find them, and then we can call the police and say, hey, we know where the defendant is. There's a warrant for his arrest. Will you come and pick him up? Okay, that's another area. But then there's the people that are, they know what's going to happen to them if they go to court. And so they know they're going to spend some time in the pokey. And so they're not going to come back willingly. And so we have to hire what we would call recovery agents. And I think that some of those are what maybe the extreme cases are what you see television shows about. And that's people who are paid to go and serve that warrant and take them back into custody. There's been some cases on that recently that are very eye-opening, people crossing state lines with someone, and if they don't have the authority to do that, they get the bond, the recovery agent gets charged with kidnapping under the federal statute. So I think we're becoming very adverse of what we can and cannot do. We don't want to cross the lines, and we don't want to be too aggressive, but we also want people to fulfill their promises to go to court. And if they don't, then we have agreed that we will do everything that we can that's legally possible to get them to court. The bonding companies in Texas cannot arrest, but we can hire private detectives who can. And so that's what happens in the extreme cases if we cannot convince them to come back.
Ken W. Good, this has been fascinating. This is such an interesting area. How can our audience get more information about you and about the professional bondsman of Texas?
They can go to our website, pbtx.com. We also have a Facebook page. We have a Twitter account. They're all linked on our Facebook page. We have a YouTube channel. We have, as I've mentioned before, we have our own podcast called the Bell Post. And we have a blog where we highlight all these stories in the criminal justice realm. I think it's so important that we're out here telling this story of how the criminal justice system works, because if you just listen to the advocates for change, I don't know if anyone's telling the story that we're telling, and that is something that's been around for 200 years and why it works so well. It just does one thing and it gets people back to court. All you hear is we need to change, we need to be more fair, that what we're currently doing is not constitutional, even though the courts keep saying it's constitutional. And so we're highlighting really the good stories of the criminal justice system, even though all you hear in the news sometimes is the bad.
I understand. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
The defense rests, Your Honor.
The Dirty Dozen. Here are some wasteful federal grants. A bunch of whack Dems have gone to the media to complain about Trump's attack on USAID. These are the same clowns who authorized the horrible waste of money that we're seeing. Remember that America is paying almost $1 trillion a year on the federal debt. Maybe these other countries should start sending aid to us. As discussion of wasteful projects hits the news, a recent news report tipped me to an article in the Federalist by M.D. Kittle, where he highlights his picks for wasting our tax dollars. Time does not permit the full details of the list, but how about some examples? The article starts with a numbing statistic. The Government Accountability Office says taxpayers lost more than $100 billion in improper payments, $50.3 billion in Medicaid payments, and $55.1 billion in Medicare in 2023 alone. The payment errors represented 43% of the total of $240 billion in improper payments reported throughout all federal agencies. All told, federal taxpayers were on the hook for $2.7 trillion in payment errors between 2003 and 2023, according to the Government Accountability Office. Think about if we didn't have wasted that money, that our federal debt would be much lower. So what are we paying for? How about some of the examples? The State Department, $100,000 for a fun run for Palestinian girls. National Science Foundation, 2-year grant of $1.5 million to Florida State University to fund, I quote, Black feminist epistemologies building a sisterhood in computing. National Science Foundation, $119,520 for a conference titled Reimagining Biology Education Through Social Justice, featuring a talk on gender-inclusive adaptations to biology teaching. Imagine that. I thought in biology they taught us there were 2 genders. Department of Agriculture, $717,000 to Ohio State University. Money's being used to solve cultural resistance in the USA and Europe that impedes the acceptance of insect proteins as food sources. Folks, how many of us want to eat bugs? Another National Science Foundation, $399,930, let's call it $400,000, to Montana State University. This is a DEI project funded through September 2027 and supposed to honor indigenous knowledge by, quote, infusing native ways of knowing into engineering education, but without engaging in the misappropriation of indigenous knowledge. What about misappropriation of taxpayer dollars, folks? Institute of Museum and Library Science, $352,799 to the University of Wisconsin system to investigate play-based programs and spaces at museums and to develop a diversity audit tool for practitioners to examine their play programs and spaces for DEI and other considerations. Come on, folks. National Science Foundation again, $634,856, also to the University of Wisconsin, urgent yet underexplored dimensions of equity-minded pedagogical change work in higher education. Folks, I have a PhD in higher education. I don't know what that stands for. Department of Health and Human Services, $792,443 to the University of Texas, Austin, studying the concept that people are normally heterosexual. Yep, didn't make that up, folks. National Science Foundation, $445,600 to Ohio State University for girls doing rock climbing. Yep. Department of Health and Human Services, $600,000 to my alma mater, the University of Virginia. Study structural ableism and basically the dominance of normal people who are heterosexual. Gosh, do you think we could just read a 50-year-old biology textbook and figure that out? National Science Foundation, we'll wrap up here. More than $112,000 of Rutgers University to develop, I quote, theory around processes of social control, state practices, human agency about the deportation of immigrants with criminal records. Hey, folks, they're called illegals, and we shouldn't have let them in the first place. I don't need to study that.
Silence in the court.
Communist China spies on the Americans and engages in transnational repression. This is important, folks, because it violates the sovereignty of the United States. The Department of Justice has unsealed an indictment surrounding an alleged Chinese spy in Florida who has been feeding the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, intelligence for 12 years. The report came from NTD, which is a network for free Chinese. Their source was the executive director of Falun Dafa Information Center, Levi Bodie, and former U.S. defense official and attaché to China, retired Brigadier General Robert Spalding. They say that the CCP is infiltrating every sphere of American life and targeting all dissidents.
I'll allow it.
A new report by the Washington Free Beacon makes some significant claims about best-selling author Robin DiAngelo. She is known for the books White Fragility and Nice Racism. Basically, the books go after white people in general with the pitch that being white automatically makes you an insensitive racist who needs to be reprogrammed. That's my interpretation, of course. The accusations against her that she plagiarized several scholars, including 2 minorities, in her doctoral thesis. As someone who holds a hard-earned doctorate and speaks to my students about the importance of crediting others when cited in their works, I take these accusations very seriously. However, I do not see that any determination has been made yet. Maybe there is an explanation.
Order in the court.
SpaceX plans to send 5 uncrewed starships to Mars in 2 years, according to its president, Elon Musk. Musk announced this on X, formerly, of course, known as Twitter. In a sensible move, Musk said that if these non-crewed trips are successful, then manned missions could be launched in 4 years. Of course, Musk is often in trouble for his ambitious timeframes. For his business interests that are traded in the stock market, such predictions can cause investigations from the SEC and other government agencies. Fortunately for him, SpaceX is a privately held company and not traded on the stock market at this time. So I think he's probably okay making interesting predictions about trips to Mars.
This session is adjourned.
Thanks for joining me for Saving America. If you have questions or comments, please find me on various social media sites. I'm Dr. David D. Schein, and I will see you next week.